Isn't it adorable? No, but seriously, isn't it adorable? This is the Volkswagen ID Buzz, and we're going to go over everything inside and out. Plus, I've done plenty of testing, so we're going to look at highway range testing, charge testing, 0 to 60 testing. Some of it's going to be surprising. Let's get into all of it. Let's start off with the exterior. So I don't think there's much debate on the way that this thing looks. People keep coming up to me and asking, hey, can I take a picture of it? People love the way that this thing looks. I think it looks beautiful, but the first thing that I thought when I saw it in person was, wow, it's huge. But it's actually not. So yes, it is tall. It's a little bit over 6 feet tall at the roofline there, but in length, it's actually 0.3 inches shorter than a Honda Accord. While it is a large vehicle in width and in height, same length as a Honda Accord, however, they've pushed this wheel all the way to the front, they've pushed this rear wheel all the way to the back, and as a result, it has a 16-inch longer wheelbase than that identical size Honda Accord. So a huge interior space. All right, some interesting things up front. Massive windshield, and the wiper blades actually go in opposite directions, so you get really good coverage with the wiper blades, and they are rain sensing. They actually work really well in the rain, and all kinds of different rain I've been driving in, and they've been really good at detecting that. Speaking of wipers, there is no frunk. However, if you do want to fill your wiper fluid, that's right there. And then you also do have a camera on the very front, which is nice for parking. Checking out the side of the car, you've got these awesome wheels. They look great, and they're actually very functional as aerodynamic covers. So while this vehicle, yes, is a brick, it has a respectable drag coefficient at just 0.29. Though again, you do have a large frontal area. We'll get into what that means for highway range later on. At the back of the vehicle, you can get a hidden retractable tow hitch, so you can maintain the aesthetic when you're not towing. And then there's an absolutely massive door for loading cargo here in the back. It is worth mentioning, this is a pretty heavy vehicle. So the rear-wheel drive version weighs about 6,000 pounds. The all-wheel drive version weighs about 6,200 pounds. Now the battery alone weighs 1,230 pounds, so even without a battery, there's 5,000 pounds of car for the all-wheel drive version. All right, so let's move on to the interior, and the main story here really just has to be interior volume. It is a massive space inside of here, thanks to the height and also thanks to this glass roof, which really pushes up the ceiling in here. And two ways to demonstrate this that are very exciting. First of all, I can actually stand up in here. I don't mean stand upright, but I can fully extend my legs and stand in here, like, you know, change some pants or whatever if you needed to. If you're thinking about, hey, maybe I'll convert this into a camper van, there's a lot of space in here to do it. But also, when it comes to the 3 rows of seating, there is tremendous leg room in all 3 rows, about 40 inches. So if I sit up front here, plenty of space for my legs. If I then go to the next row, again, I'm 6'1", I've got long legs, plenty of space in front of my legs here. And then finally, if I go to the 3rd row, and I'll come behind this seat right here, even in this back row, there's, half a foot between me and the seat in front of me. So you can genuinely fit 7 adults in this vehicle, no problem if they're tall. On the subject of electric power, a big thanks to today's sponsor, Sukas, for sending their latest Neos 2, a 2-in-1 electric toothbrush and water flosser. Yep, not just an electric toothbrush, but also a powerful water flosser that features an ultra-fine 0.6mm water stream with a peak pressure of 124.3 psi. If you're curious how far that launches water, well, so was I. So I measured it at over 18 feet. Flossing is important for removing plaque, which can harden into tartar and eventually cause cavities. You can think of this like a pressure washer for your teeth, or even your car if you're into that. Even with all that power, the battery can last a full 30 days. And sure, the water tank certainly looks small, ensuring it's a portable and travel-friendly water flosser, but it's actually good for a full 60 seconds of flossing and easy to refill. Keep your teeth and your ride in peak condition by regularly cleaning them. You'll find a link to the Sukas Neos 2 in the video description. All right, sitting in the driver's seat, the first thing that you notice is that the windshield is pretty far forward, which, is quite a contrast to the original VW bus where you're sitting right up front. Though today we have crumple zones for safety reasons, so that is to be expected. And actually, the visibility is pretty good. Also up front here with the driver's seat, you have this removable center console, and it has these kind of adjustable sliders in here to make whatever size you want. Also functions as an ice scraper and a bottle opener there. So kind of some clever touches they've put with storage in the front. As far as the controls and the navigation, the infotainment, it is a bit of a beast, so we will get into that later. However, the sound system itself is phenomenal. In the second row, you've got heated seats on the outside seats, and you have the largest sunroof in Volkswagen Group. So this is 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, and it has a polymer dispersed liquid crystal layer. So when you apply current to that layer, it's transparent, you can see through it, and when you de-energize that layer, it then blocks light, and that is what we are looking at right here. So right now it is off. When you turn the vehicle off, it will turn off, and so it will block sunlight from coming in the cabin. All right, at the back, there's good news. So cargo space is decent, but you can, of course, fold these seats flat. So once you do that, you've got easy 7 feet of flat storage space. If you want to put a bed in here and lay down, you can absolutely do that. Honestly, you can hit 8 feet if you move the front seats up a little bit of flat space. So that is quite cool. And also, these rear seats can be removed. And look how easy this is. Pull, pull, it's out. It's that simple to take these seats out. So that is exciting to me because it's not a complicated task to get them in or out. It's very simple to put these in and then raise them back up, and there you go, boom, your seat is back. So very functional interior here. Of course, they're not going to fold in because you've got a battery, but they're easy to remove. Moving on to the different versions of this car, you can get it in either rear-wheel drive, so you've got one electric motor in the back, or you can get it with all-wheel drive, and that adds an electric motor up front. Some of the non-obvious differences between the rear-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive version is how many seats you get. So if it's rear-wheel drive, it seats 7. If it's all-wheel drive, it seats 6. You have captain's chairs in the middle. I don't understand why those are linked to rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. To me, that doesn't make sense, but that's the choice you get. Also, with the rear-wheel drive, you have an exceptional turning radius because you don't have those drive shafts going to the front wheels. So really good turning radius, despite this thing being pretty massive. And then finally, with the all-wheel drive version, you do get a bit more towing, 3,500 pounds versus 2,600 pounds with rear-wheel drive. All right, so as far as the battery, it could be bigger. 91 kilowatt hours is the gross capacity, 86 kilowatt hours is what you get access to. So what does this mean for range? They say 234 miles with rear-wheel drive or 231 miles with all-wheel drive. I did a 75 mile per hour range test where I take the vehicle, sit on the highway at 75 miles per hour. I went 20 miles about one direction, came back those same about 20 miles. I had cruise control set on 75. It sat there the whole time. And I had climate control set at 72. It was about 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so cool but not cold. And so over the course of exactly 38 miles, it used exactly 20% of the battery. So what does that mean? A highway range at 75 miles per hour of 190 miles. For a 2025 vehicle, that to me feels a bit disappointing, especially considering the price tag for this thing, and also considering that, it looks like a great road trip vehicle, right? But then the range doesn't really match that. So that's a bit of a bummer. Also checking with Car and Driver, they also do a 75 mile per hour test, and they did it with the all-wheel drive version. This was with the rear-wheel drive version. They also got exactly 190 miles for their range test at 75 miles per hour. So that seems to be the highway range. Now, as far as the range that I got with this vehicle while I've been driving it, I took it from 100% down to 40%. I drove 121 miles, so that gives you an indication that with that style of driving, which there was some acceleration testing and highway testing and that sort of thing, it was getting 202 miles of range. Again, I think for this kind of vehicle, we only get one electric minivan. This is our only option in the United States. But I feel like the range could have been better. All right, let's move on to charging. So Volkswagen says it has a peak charging rate of 200 kilowatts and it can charge from 10 to 80% in 26 minutes. I took it down below 10% battery and plugged it into a fast charger capable of those high speeds. It can in fact charge at 200 kilowatts, though it starts to drop off at about 35%. And I measured 10 to 80%, and guess what? 26 minutes and 5 seconds. So exactly what Volkswagen says, it can do that. That's not that fast by today's standards. There are cars that can do 10 to 80% in about 8 to 10 minutes faster than that, which is pretty significant. I will show what that charge curve looks at as far as the kilowatts versus the battery percentage. It does start to drop off pretty quickly once you hit 35% and continues to decline as you go up to fully charge it. Charging from 10 to 90%, taking about 33 minutes. I'll put up a graph of time versus percent charge just so you can see exactly how long it takes to go from different increments. Now, as far as the process of charging on Electrify America charging stations, the first one I went to, it took 3 times plugging it in order to get it to work. The second time it did work the first time I plugged it in. However, it still took a couple minutes before it started charging. So as far as using it as a road trip vehicle, and say you're staying between 10 and 80% to optimize that road trip, well, you're driving 133 miles, assuming you have 190 miles of range at 75 miles per hour, and you're staying in that 70% window, and you're charging for 26 minutes every time that happens. So every 133 miles driven, charge for 26 minutes, add a couple minutes before things start and getting to that station, so a half-hour stop basically every 2 hours of driving. It's fine, it's certainly doable, it's just that this is a new car and there are older cars that do a much better job at this. Also worth mentioning, it does not come with a charging cable, so if you want to charge at home, it is a $350 option to get that charger. Alright, so let's move on to performance. In the back of the rear-wheel drive model is the electric motor, much like the old VW bus, which had the engine in the back. So it has 282 horsepower, 413 pound-feet of torque. But again, this thing is quite heavy, right? Now, if you go with the all-wheel drive model, you get another motor up front and you get about 53 added horsepower to that peak number, so 335 horsepower. What's the acceleration like? I tested this with battery at 96%, climate control off. The battery was preheated. I had just come off a charger, so perfect conditions, straight line. 0 to 60 took about 7 to 7.3 seconds. I did 5 different tests, varying things up as far as with a brake hold, without a brake hold. I did it with traction control on, with traction control off. And so my fastest time with the rear-wheel drive model was 6.94 seconds. Now, Car and Driver has tested the all-wheel drive model and they got 5.8 seconds from 0 to 60 with the all-wheel drive. So about a full second quicker, a little bit over for the all-wheel drive. It isn't exactly quick, especially for an EV. For an EV, it's kind of slow, but for a big van, it's got plenty of power and you're not going to be that disappointed in acceleration. Now that said, you really do start to notice the acceleration taper off at about 50 miles per hour, and above that, there's not that much punch to it. All right, let's move on to interior controls, and here is where things get frustrating. So to me, the question I keep asking myself is, who asked for this? Because so many of these things, it just doesn't seem like anyone actually wants. So don't worry, I'm going to go through a very specific list of things that are frustrating as far as controls, starting with getting in and out of the vehicle. So we've just pulled into the garage, we've parked, we're gonna go inside, right? We open our door and we're gonna get out and, oh, I left a bag or whatever right here in this seat, so I'm gonna grab it. And as I get over to grab it, the car turns off. As I sit back down, the car turns back on. I rummage over here, the car turns back off again. I sit back down, the car turns back on again. I mess with my kids or whatever back here. I don't have kids, but if I did, you know, I sit back down, the car's back on. So every single time you move in this seat, the car turns off, the car turns back on. Now, you might think, well, it has an on-off button right here. Why not just, if it's off, push this button, and then, hey, it's on, right? Well, what if I get out of my seat now? It turns off again. Literally right after I just said, hey, turn the car on, if I sit up, the car turns off. So it's crazy frustrating because if you want this thing to stay on, you have to be sitting in the seat, and as you're getting out, it just keeps turning on and off constantly. All right, buckle up, because that's just number one. All right, number two, you have this slider here for volume control. So you don't have a volume knob where you can just turn it one and you know you get an increase of 1 in volume. Instead, you just have this vague slider, so you just put your finger on this and slide left or right and hope it goes up. Now you can tap there for an increase of 1 or tap there for a decrease of 1, but that of course means you're looking away from, driving ahead of you and instead focusing on where do I need to touch this thing to make it go down 1 or up 1. So the slider, not that great to use. On the subject of music, there is no pause button on the steering wheel. So you have all these buttons on the steering wheel. You can change the volume, you can skip the song, but there's no pause button. So the only way I've found to do it is you can either slide all the way left and turn off the volume and that will pause it, or you can turn off the sound system entirely by hitting the on-off button, and that's a way that you can pause your music. But there is no pause button on the steering wheel. So if you want to roll down the rear window, well, first you have to press the rear button and then you can roll down that rear window. Now, if you then want to put up your driver's side window, you can't just go do that again, it's still on rear. So you have to push rear and then you can put the driver's side window up. So they made a one-step process, a two-step process. On the steering wheel, you have these haptic feedback buttons. For most functions, they're okay, but I don't like them for cruise control. So here you can see the cruise control speed is set at 55 miles per hour. If you want to adjust that, you have this plus and minus. So how much you adjust it depends on how much pressure you apply on that button. A little bit goes up by 1, a lot goes up by 5. But while you're driving, that's a pretty sensitive thing to get correctly. So you're getting frustrated because you just want to go up by 1 and instead you go up by 5. Also, if you press this thing in the middle, well then suddenly you're locked out because you're only adjusting that distance. So if you want to then adjust your speed, wait, okay, now I can adjust my speed. And if you accidentally just slide against this, you can easily change your speed. So I don't like it for controlling your speed with cruise control. Touch controls for the climate control settings. So let me demonstrate here. If you want to change the temperature, you have this slider. And honestly, it works just fine. You can touch it there, or you can hit the temp and you can adjust using that on the screen there. Either one of these works for adjusting. The problem I have with it is that say you want to change the settings within your climate controls here. Well, if you've just been touching this, then it blocks you out. So you can't hit that. You have to wait and then you can go in. So again, if that's down and you're adjusting this or you hit it here, either way, it's a pretty long pause that you have to wait before you can hit climate and then adjust the settings. So it blocks you out, and it's like, it doesn't need to do that, right? Let's say the climate settings were down and you adjust that. It could leave that climate button right there because all it's changing is that. So why does the climate button go away when you're changing the temperature? And then you have to wait for it to come back in order to access it. I really do like that it has a front-facing camera. I think that's cool. But when you use the reverse camera, it is pretty bad quality, especially at night. It's hard to tell what you're looking at with the backup camera at night. Sometimes the screen will actually lock you out, and so this is a bit distracting. So I was driving down the road and I'm adjusting the sound settings on the screen. Okay, maybe it's not the greatest idea to adjust the sound settings while you're driving, but it allows you to do it. I'm sitting there doing it and it says, hey, you've spent too much time doing this. You need to pay attention to the road. So now while you're driving, you want to change that setting that you're waiting to change, but the screen's blocked you out. So you're looking at the screen and waiting and saying, okay, when is it going to let me just move this one little slider so I can be done looking at it? But instead you're blocked out. So it's like choosing when you can and when you can't actually interact with it if you've been sitting there messing with settings. All right, let's move on to navigation. Now, good news first. If you're just driving around town, you've got wireless Apple CarPlay. You can just use your phone, wirelessly connect, and navigate wherever you need to get around town. Easy peasy, Apple CarPlay works great. However, if you're going on a road trip, well, 3 negative things about this navigation system. system. And I think it's important to clarify that onboard navigation is useful for road trips because this thing knows your battery state of charge and it knows your battery's temperature. So that's important for two reasons. First of all, it knows where to plan your charging stops, and second of all, it can preheat your battery before you arrive at those charging stops. It won't do that if you're just using Apple CarPlay. So the first one, it won't exclusively look for Electrify America stations, despite the fact that this comes with a 3-year pass to Electrify America Pass Plus, and it is a system, a charging network built by Volkswagen. So you can't just choose to go to Electrify America stations. There's an option that lets you select Electrify America, but then it throws in other options regardless along your path, even though there's Electrify America stations nearby. So I don't understand why you can't exclusively choose the network that they built and the network that comes with a pass for this car for the first 3 years. It's not free charging, but it's discounted. Second problem with the navigation system, the maximum charging speed you can have it search for is 100 kilowatts. This thing charges at 200 kilowatts. So when I put in navigate from here to Los Angeles, it has me stopping at a 120 kilowatt hour station. And it's like, why can't I search for only stations that can max out this thing's charging capability? And there are. I looked along the path. It can charge at faster stations along this path, and yet it chooses this 120 kilowatt charging station. That doesn't make sense. And then finally, overall, it's just kind of clunky. So the first place I punched in when I got in the car was a Trader Joe's, and it couldn't find the Trader Joe's. So I was like, all right, whatever. I punched in the address to the Trader Joe's. It still couldn't find it. So I Googled and said, when was this Trader Joe's built? 6 months ago. Okay, so this Trader Joe's has been up for 6 months, and this navigation system cannot find it. Of course, I can find it in seconds on my phone. So it's just clunky. Apparently it's not up to date. It doesn't let you search for the optimal charging stations. Overall, I don't like the onboard navigation system. All right, moving on to what is it like to drive? Great news, it's incredible. For the type of vehicle that this is, I love the way that it drives. It is very comfortable. I took it even on some really rough roads. Even there, it was comfortable. I tried out, the traction control on twisty roads, giving it full throttle. This being rear wheel drive, thinking, hey, maybe it's gonna be sketchy. Even in the rain, twisty roads, leaves on the ground, really good traction control, and it's just a very easy, very comfortable, very pleasant thing to drive. All of the driver inputs as far as steering, braking, acceleration, they're all very comfortable, kind of soft. I would like a bit firmer brake pedal feel, but for the kind of vehicle it is, it feels great. There were only 2 scenarios with the brake pedal where I could notice the transition from regen to mechanical brakes. There was once where it really did slam over and it just kind of lurched forward. That was a little concerning. But most of the time, all of the controls are fantastic, and it's just a super simple, easy to drive, very quiet. You hear no powertrain noise. So the motor is in the back. That's the only motor, right? With the rear wheel drive, you cannot hear it at all. It is dead silent in here, especially at low speeds. So really quiet, super comfortable, great highway cruiser as far as what it feels like, not the range, but as far as driving this thing, I was pleasantly surprised. It is fantastic. Now, my only real complaint on the driving experience is that it doesn't have one pedal driving. And it gets really close, and that's kind of what makes it even more frustrating, because you can have it auto brake hold, right? So if you come to a stop, you don't have to have your foot on either pedal, just like any other electric car with one pedal driving. And you can put it in B mode, and it decelerates at 0.13 Gs when you let off the accelerator, but only down to 3 miles per hour. So at a stop, you effectively have one pedal driving because you can take your feet off the pedals, and above 3 miles per hour, you effectively have one pedal driving. But you can't have it from 0 to about 3 miles per hour. And it's like, why not just give everyone the option, just the option to choose that if they so wish? So it has regen braking up to 0.25 Gs with your foot on the brake pedal. Above that, it taps into the mechanical. Almost all of the time, except for once or twice, you don't notice that blend over occurring at all. So driving experience, excellent. I wish it had one pedal driving. All right, finally, let's talk about price. Now, this rear window is actually really cool. So it sits flush with the exterior, and then when you open it, it pulls in and then slides over. Anyways, we're talking about price, and it's kind of disappointing. Yeah, $60,000 for the rear-wheel drive version, close to $70,000 for the all-wheel drive version. It could be justified, I think, if it had the range to go along with it, but it really doesn't. So the closest competitor to this, we don't have an electric minivan in the US, but the closest thing would be the Kia EV9. You can get into a rear-wheel drive Kia EV9 for $61K, and that's giving you EPA 304 miles of range, so 70 additional miles over the rear-wheel drive version of this EPA rating. You can also get into an all-wheel drive of that with 280 miles EPA range at $65K. So the Kia beats this really in price and range. Styling, I think this thing looks fantastic, and I think that's really what you're paying for. But consider that, okay, the Tesla Model X, which shouldn't be compared to this, but regardless, it does qualify for the federal tax credit, whereas this does not. So for $5,000 more than this, the all-wheel drive at about $70K, you can get into a Tesla Model X that has another 100 miles of EPA range. It's way quicker, and it has a faster and more user-friendly, charging experience. So I think the price is a bit of a pill to swallow. You're really paying for the design here, though again, the design is really, really cool. So. All right, closing out with major takeaways, top 3 good. It is a beautiful design inside and out. It has a massive interior space that is a super functional interior. And finally, it drives exceptionally. It is really fantastic to drive for this segment of vehicle. Top 3 bad. A lot of the user interface can be frustrating to use. The range and charging speed is mediocre by modern standards, and the price is a bit high for what you're getting. If it didn't look the way that it looks, I think it might be completely overlooked. But it does look the way that it looks, and it's excellent to drive. So I can understand those who are excited to get into one. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching.